Alan.
Hi, how are you?
Well, besides the fact that my video intro still says Tuesday, it's not Tuesday. Welcome, Alain Dumonceaux.
Perfect.
Okay, Alan, you are the awakened man, and you like to speak to men to introduce them with a few small tweaks to more in their life.
Absolutely. It's about awakening themselves from the life's daily grind and really understanding of who they are, what they aspire to become, and taking responsibility for it. So, absolutely.
Who's your main audience?
My main audience, I would suggest that they're probably in around 30 to 55. They're married, they have a busy lifestyle. Sometimes they're business owners or they're executives, but they have lots on their plate. And the challenge that they're facing is that life has just taken over, and anything that they had aspired to do has really fallen off the wayside. And so they've stopped caring about things, and they have taken too much for granted.
Yeah, I think it's also something that can happen to women quite easily. Okay, so we know each other already from the Relationships for Men Summit, and I know that people have enjoyed your talk tremendously. But tonight we are going to be very brave, and we're going to talk about the most difficult subjects that there is to discuss, and these are always the subjects that cause the most discord, even if we don't talk openly about them, even if we're too scared to approach them, they are around in the background and they are going to trip us up time and time again. And so we are talking about sex, money, and spirituality.
Absolutely. I call those the big three. They're like a three-legged stool. And really, I find that the problem that we face with those is that we rarely talk about or have deep conversations during the courtship time. At least that's been my experience in speaking with other men. And so we get blinded because we're so excited about the newness and the freshness of the experience, but we forget that we don't necessarily see the potential challenges or flaws that are right in front of us with these three topics. And so we tend to not talk about it, right? So in the beginning, you're probably spending more money than you normally would. You're trying to impress one another. You're doing things over and above because it's so new, and you're really trying to position yourself as being that one for that person that you're with. And often, I would suggest that sex is very often, and it's amazing, but we end up by falling into routine. And so, depending on how long that courtship can last, we may continue on with that process, but ultimately, that initial passion flames out, and then we get stuck into our daily routines. And so, I think for me, when I'm working with men, I see those are the challenges that we face with those big three.
Okay, let's go back to money.
Yeah.
You said something that was really interesting to me now, because this is definitely the male perspective. That's why I love having these conversations. So you go out in the beginning, intend to treat somebody, to show that what is it that you are showing?
Well, I think what we're showing as men is that we want to show that we are the provider, that we are there to support and provide for our partner and for our family. And I think that as we do this in courtship, that we're trying to put our best foot forward. And so money does play a role. It will play a role in how we spend it, how we take care of ourselves. And so I think we set ourselves up as, this is who I am, or I'm portraying myself, and it may be outside of who our true identity is. Because ultimately we may be bigger savers than we are bigger spenders. But we've set this precedent and this atmosphere, and it can be challenging, right?
Okay, and then also what it means is that a big proportion of men are then therefore still buying into the traditional role of the man being the provider, and still see themselves as, this is the role I'm supposed to do.
Absolutely, for sure, and I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that. I think that that's a great role for men to play. But do we have an understanding, or does our partner have an understanding of how that looks like? Maybe she doesn't need the full version or vision that we have of what that provider looks like. And are we having that conversation with them to understand how they see themselves fitting into that role, into the role, and so that there's some understanding between in the relationship. But as men, we tend to think that we need to be that patriarchal provider and take care of everything, and not really ask, or we get into the conversation with our partner or spouse to say, how do you feel? What's your position on it?
Yeah, see, I mean, you raise a very valid point there, which is it's all about the communication, which in today's changed society is all important, because what traditionally has been expected is not necessarily expected and may even be very detrimental. I totally agree with you. I mean, it's because of so many really big. I can't even call it a fight. It's a basic structural difference in outlook, and if you don't address that early on, you have a husband who expects his wife to work, or a husband who doesn't expect of his wife to work, and of course all the other roles that are in between. But just that expectation, if you don't manage expectations early on, if you don't have conversations about them, then you end up in a relationship where you are locked in, and with people of different expectations of how they're going to live their life.
Absolutely, and I think that you bring up such a great point about money. And I think the other area that we don't discuss is that, as I got married very young, I got married in my early 20s to my high school sweetheart, and those money conversations we just didn't have them. We were both starting out working and just getting started, so we didn't talk about, well, are we saving for any retirement? Are we planning on saving for a house? When children come along, are we putting away for an education fund? None of those discussions were being had. It was live for today. But I notice now, as I have friends who are, and I'm in my mid 50s now, and I have friends who recently been married, or second time. And as we get older, we tend to start to have those conversations a little bit more. And it sounds like to me more and more couples are very independent with their money. The joint bank account may not be a piece that works in their relationship, and it may be. And that's another conversation to have: how we manage the overall finances for the house. What are the important things? Is retirement important? Is travel important? And how do we get to those points to achieve everything we want? Or is it just something that we do without thinking? And I think that's the challenge, that we just don't have that conversation, right?
Yeah, way too many of us get married when we're not emotionally mature. And then we have big abandonment fears, which makes us not speak. Because when you have abandonment fears, you don't want to rock that boat. You don't want to risk losing this relationship. We become addicted to each other, so we don't want to do anything to upset it.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the big conversations, they are not avoidable.
That's right. Absolutely. And we have to, and it's the hard conversations that we need to look at having, because you're absolutely right. We have this sense of codependency, especially in the beginning. And if you've been burnt, as many people have been in previous relationships, we tend to have our guard up, which is why we portray in the beginning this facade of being they are parts of who we are, but they're embellished, and it's not truly who we are as a whole. And so we put our best foot forward, and may not say something that after a few years we may be more comfortable to speak up about, or we don't at all, because we become doormats. And I know in my marriage, I was like that for many years. I just wouldn't challenge my wife on topics such as this. Challenge being that just saying, "Oh, I don't agree with that position, and this is where I'm coming from with it," and to have that conversation that allows the dialogue to go, so both of us have a deeper understanding of what the other wants and needs out of the relationship.
Okay, how did you make that switch? Because this is what we all want to know right now. This is the magical question. You come from not sharing how you really feel. You probably walked around with a few resentments or feeling unseen or unheard,
Yeah.
which brings passive aggressiveness and withdrawal and punishment into the relationship.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you did it, but it's the general kind of pattern.
Yeah.
It poisons the relationship.
Yeah.
And then you manage to start, not only to start talking, but you also manage to inspire other people. So now you have to share it with us. How did you do that?
So what ended up
what woke you up, Alan? What woke you up? Awakened man.
You know, what woke me up was that my wife and I finally had got to a point in our marriage where it was ready to, one or both of us was ready to walk out. And when I look back at it, it's just not what I wanted to do. We could have a better relationship. I could be a better partner. So I started to look at the times when I would have this feeling when we'd be in a discussion and my wife would say something that I didn't agree with, and the stress I was feeling about it, where I wouldn't say anything, I said, okay, I need to express myself today. Can you allow me to speak, to say what's on my mind? And she would say yes. And then I'd say, I'm not sure if I'm going to say it right. So, just give me the opportunity to practice getting out what I need to get out. And I got to tell you, there were so many times that I stubbed my toe and it didn't go over well. But it would needed to be done. And we got better at saying, okay, I don't agree with that, or I'm having an issue with what you've just said. And I would express my feeling of what I needed out of the conversation. So it's really about getting to that level 5 of intimacy, right? It's that being able to be afraid enough. And I did say that in the beginning, for sure, to say, I'm really afraid to tell you this because it could mean that you may want to leave, but I have to tell you, otherwise you'll never know.
And it improved your relationship.
Absolutely, it improved because we moved from walking on eggshells and tiptoeing around conversations to where now we were welcoming that opportunity. When Kim, that's my wife, when Kim comes to me and says, I need to talk to you about something, I'm not triggered anymore. I'm not, oh, what am I going to do with this? I can, yeah, okay, I'm ready for this now. And those are the things I think it's important that men need to understand, is that you will be triggered when those first attempts, because it's uncomfortable. We're not in that position. We're not used to being there. And when we allow ourselves to be in that space and know that this is someone that we love, who wants to express a deeper affection for you, for something that they're struggling with, it's only going to make the relationship better.
But it is, women also, there are some women who struggle with this because, we don't have just one set of outlooks in a relationship. So some women are scared to do the same, to say, a lot of women are scared to say, I don't like this, I don't agree with you, don't know how to do it. Traditionally don't feel that it's acceptable for them to say something about the head of a house. So, and then it does come out in punishment. Mm-hmm. And it very often will lead over into the sexual relationship deteriorating, that passive aggressiveness, that punishment, that withholding. So it very often will influence the sexual relationship.
Absolutely, it sure does. That's such a great point that you bring up, because it does. That's what ends up by happening. It'll show up in the bedroom or out of the bedroom, depending on the relationship. And then that starts to build more resentment, and because we're not talking about that part of our life as well. And I think it's a good point that we're this path that we're going on, because the challenges that we can have from a sexual standpoint isn't necessarily about frequency and style and all that, but it's about the other things in the relationship that make the sexual part of our marriages or our relationships not as attractive to our partners, because all this other stuff is going on. and we're not addressing this other stuff. And so I learned that if I wasn't better out of the bedroom, things were not going to improve in the bedroom.
Yeah, because basically men and women are wired differently, and it is just that sense of safety. But I mean, for both parties, I think it's very important to feel seen and to feel heard.
Yeah.
There's less of a mechanical triggers going on, where a man can still get past that. But with a woman, very definitely, it improves the relationship on so many levels if you just feel seen and heard. So back to the communication again. I have something which I say to people, especially if they are in second relationships or trying to fix a relationship, is start the way you mean to go, which is very hard if you're young and stupid and you have got no life experience and you didn't have any healthy role models.
Yeah.
But, it's such a journey of self-exploration where you've got to find out, what do I really want? What's my opinions really? Do I have opinions on money and sex and spirituality that I need to share, and a whole host of other things too? How many children, like you say, and where do I see us 20 years from now? There's so many things we are supposed to talk about. But if we don't know ourselves and we just bumble along, we actually can't have those conversations until it starts to become rubbing points.
Absolutely, that is so true. It is so true. Most of the time, in our early 20s, and I would suggest even in our 30s, we are just living day to day. We're not in that. We haven't really had a true self-discovery moment, and I will suggest that for many people, it's because we haven't had that life-changing experience, and where children come in, or you're getting your first home, or a large or a job loss, things that really force you to look at yourself, that those generally haven't happened just yet. And if they have, then you may be still in reflex mode, and so you're very guarded in how you approach things. And so that inner work needs to be consistently done. But as you get a little older, a little bit more mature in your thinking and processing, you get an opportunity to know that it's okay to share with the people that you love and trust, and that we have to be willing to step out and be that person, because it's the only way we're going to get it back. If I want more affection and more attention in my life, what am I doing for my partner? Am I working all the time? Am I never home? Am I not participating in the relationship? Well, then that's probably a good reflection on where and how your relationship is being formed, right?
Okay, now I'm going to ask you a tough question.
Oh, I thought these were tough.
No, well, you chose the subject. You were brave, so we're going to go in. What does a woman do when a husband or a partner is touchy about the subject of performance in the bedroom? I don't like it like that. Try a little bit of this. And the spirits get deflated immediately. So what do you do in that case when it's really hard, when you're with a partner who probably does not have enough self-confidence to hear you?
Wow. Yeah.
I told you it's going to be a hard one.
Yeah, no kidding. I think that is something that as men we need to really work on, and know that you're never, whatever you see in the movies or whatever you're going to read in a book isn't going to work. It's about the person that you're spending time with. And again, it comes back to being vulnerable and knowing that she is with you for more reasons than what's happening in the bedroom. To me, that is the icing on the cake. That's not the cake. The cake is a relationship and everything that goes and all the ingredients that make that. And so we need to be awake enough to understand and pick up the signals from our partners when they're not into it, when it's not working for them. And instead of trying to be, well, if I don't make my wife orgasm today, then I'm not a good lover. Well, I think that's really a poor way to think about it. it's about paying attention and being willing to ask what works for her. What does she need and want? Because let's face it, most men, we strike a match and we're ready to go. That's not the way it works for many women, and so we need to spend that intimacy, that emotional energy into the relationship to help get it to that point where we can be comfortable and ask, how do you like this? How do you prefer this position? Do you prefer to do this instead? And then to have all of those conversations in a safe way.
Yeah, because it doesn't work if you have a woman who keeps quiet because she is scared or afraid of hurting your feelings or messing up what you have because you are touchy about it. But it is really important to know that not everybody likes the same thing. Not everybody's different. If you don't tune in to the person that you are with for both sides, then you are missing a huge opportunity.
Yeah.
I just want to quickly check something from our audience. Is anybody hearing an echo? Because am I the only one who's hearing an echo? I hope not. But nobody's complaining about an echo so far, and nobody's complaining about my frogs. that was Monday night. my frogs are quiet tonight. Okay, so that brings us to. I hear an echo. It's me. Let me check. Can't be. I don't know why I hear the echo. It normally happens if Facebook is open in another place. Let me make sure it's not open.
No problem.
I don't know what's going on. I really hear an echo. I hope it's not bad for anybody, because this is these subjects are so important.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're back to spirituality, and if you have somebody deeply feel, and you have somebody else who are not of the same wavelength, it can create enormous separation between people, and it may people emotional blackmail. And let me check quickly. Let me see. Okay, that's great. And also no frogs, Peter. Missing my frogs. Okay, so it's a huge problem when we deal with these very, very triggering situations. We're very often talking about people's entire belief system and upbringing, and so you in the middle of the throes of love, you get together, and then you find out, oh heck, we are not seeing eye to eye about this. And do you have any tips for how to approach that?
Well, I think the importance of, from a spiritual perspective, is to have an understanding of what our belief system. And I don't need to speak. Some people get very triggered when you use the word God. Others aren't. But just having the conversations around beliefs and values will give you a sense of what that individual's spiritual beliefs are. And I think that's an easier conversation in the beginning to have. And then ultimately we need to look at having the conversation about what our beliefs are about, ourselves, the universe, how we came to be, whether church is important and community of some sort. And then, I'm fortunate that my wife and I are on the same spiritual path. Although when we got together, neither one of us I was raised Catholic. I hadn't stepped into church since I was probably 15, and didn't return to any type of service till in my 40s and 50s. And so our spiritual journey evolved through different means. And I think it's important that when you have an understanding of whether your partner is very much a religious person, and I use that term to state that it's somebody that goes to service on a regular basis, practices reading scripture on a daily basis, has some routine within their daily and weekly lives that forms their spiritual practice, then are we okay with that? And are we okay with our partner not following that path? Because I think there is a place in today's world, society, that both individuals don't have to be in the same spiritual path if there's enough openness to allow and receive what the other is bringing to the relationship and for everything around the relationship. And so that's my personal belief. I think we get into trouble when we say, well, you have to believe what I believe. And you have to do this and you have to do that. But when we allow it to be open and we become the model of what our spiritual and our beliefs are, that is a better conduit to having your partner see that, boy, I really like how that is working for Alan, or I really like how that's working for my wife. And we become more open to it as opposed to a push and a challenge. But I think it needs to be discussed. I don't think it should be something that should be pushed under the rug.
What you're really saying is that mutual respect. We're talking about mutual respect for another person, their choices, their life that we are sharing.
That's right. That's right. It's being that open to share and hear what the other person has to say. And if it really is a deal point for you, then you already know that at the outset. And so it must be a discussion before it's marriage, kids, and everything else that follows through. That if you're not having that conversation and thinking, well, I'm going to change her or him, that's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If anybody is not willing to accept the other person as is, and you walk around with the idea in your head, I will change that person, or I will control that person, or whatever ways and means you want that person to conform to your ideas. Not only that, if you walk around with the idea that you are right, the other person is somehow less than you, and therefore the other person is wrong and your ideas are more right. And therefore your way of seeing things is the only way. Now, that's a very obvious problem, and one that a lot of people have, that they just so believe that they are right, that there's no space for the other person's opinion, belief systems, outlooks, simply because they believe they are right.
I completely agree with that, and my thought on why somebody sits in there, because I'm like that in some aspects, where I believe that this is the way it is, and because to think of anything different would mean that some other things in my life might be wrong, and if that's wrong, then what does that mean about me, and what have I lived up to? And those are tough, hard questions for us to ask ourselves. But they're not going to, I wouldn't suggest that they're going to ruin us or make it so poor that our lives are lost. We may feel a little lost, going through our process, but it helps us get a broader understanding about what's really going on. Because when we're that adamant that it needs to be this way, what we're saying is that we're too afraid to expand the possibilities, because outside of that exists the unknown, and I don't know what the unknown is, and I don't want to deal with that. And there really isn't anything too much in this life that we can't deal with, that we can't survive.
It's an amazing day when you can find out how wrong you have been about so many things in life that you are holding on for dear life.
Yeah.
So just not only the respect that we need to have for each other, but also the acceptance that the other person is a whole person, and an adult with a right to their own outlooks, a right to their boundaries, a right to feel differently, to have different routines, and the willingness to negotiate everything in the middle so that the relationship can work. That willingness to see the other person as an equal person with as much right as you have to your expression, that is such a vital, non-negotiable part of a relationship, which we do need emotional maturity for, I'm going to say.
Yeah. And I like that you use the word willingness, because we may have the will to do something, but do we have the willingness, which is the active part of that will? Because we tend to talk a good game around certain subjects, especially these three. But do we have the willingness to address and take the hard yards to understand what's really important to our partner, and that they understand what's important to us? Because that only deepens the relationship. That just brings the relationship closer, and protects it from outside forces that may come in. And because we haven't had that conversation, so we may tend to lean to speak to somebody else outside of the relationship that we probably shouldn't be doing, because it could lead to other things, right?
Yeah, and I think this topic also leads us to talk about inflexibility, because if anybody's, it's much the same thing, but just saying it in a different way, so that somebody can understand if they are rigid in their approach, if they are inflexible, if they are not teachable, then their need for control or for self-control is going to be so much, for self-preservation even, is going to be so much that nothing will penetrate, and it will become a highly frustrating relationship for both in the end.
I totally agree, because we are so focused on protecting ourselves that I'll suggest that it's a past hurt. Maybe it's an inner child work, whatever you want to refer to it as, but it's that past hurt, and we're protecting it so much that we're not allowing a new learning to occur, because we're stuck with the old learning. Well, when this happened back then, this is what occurred, and I can never let that happen again. True, but there's a different way to approach it. And this is the different scenario, a different person. We're hopefully older and wiser, that we allow ourselves to be open enough. I'm not saying open the doors wide open and be completely and totally vulnerable, but it's a small step. Maybe it's not one of these three topics that you start with, but you talk about something else that is, maybe it's just having the discussion on boundaries and having smaller boundary discussions. That gives you the confidence as a couple to work through how that dialogue looks, so that you get good at it, and then you can start to pile on the bigger ones, put the bigger pieces in. And I know that maybe sound counterintuitive, but I think you have to do what works for you as an individual and as a couple. And if the big rocks work better and you want to tackle the big three, outstanding. I think that's phenomenal. But I would suggest that it may be a better start with something a little smaller, that you can learn how to say things and work through things to help each other open up, because all of us come with past wounds. And how willing are we to open up?
It's not so hard, because you can, like you say, you can start with the small ones. Let's go eat out at this place. You know what? We've been to that one a lot of times, and I actually haven't told you that I don't like fish so much. Can we just go to another place? I would prefer to go to this one this time. That's where you start with the little ones, because if you cannot speak about not liking fish, you're not going to speak about the money situation. You're not going to speak about the sex position. You're not going to speak about religion. You're going to walk around in a resentment or feeling unseen or not important, and you're going to have this thing in your head. Surely he should. Surely they should. They're supposed to know, which is wishful thinking, which doesn't happen. Yeah. Okay, so if let's forget about wishful thinking and mind reading. Mind reading. No, that one doesn't exist either. You're supposed to ask and say what you want. Okay, so now if we have a problem that people have gone into a relationship, they were not as emotionally mature, and they didn't know all these things, and they didn't have an example, and some of us are slow learners, and what's going to happen is that it's actually going to get increasingly harder and harder until you need to pay attention, don't you think?
Absolutely. It will get very hard in the relationship. And that hardness will show up in different ways. It's going to show up where your partner will totally disassociate, disconnect from who you are, or you will do the same. You'll spend more time doing other things. other influences outside of the relationship, as I was mentioning earlier, start to come in. You start to confide in someone else of the opposite sex, and all of a sudden now they're hearing and listening to you. But truly what's going on is that you've never said that to your partner, because there's too much at risk with this one. But here there's nothing there to worry about. And so that's becomes the challenge of what ends up by happening, right? And so we have to have that awareness, be awake enough to recognize the patterns that we're repeating, because ultimately, if it doesn't work out with this marriage, why is it going to work out any better with the next one? Because guess what? I'm the common factor in all of these relationships. So at some point I have to look at and go, well, what part of it do I need to own, and what is for mine to own, and how can I become a conduit and help that partnership and the marriage get better if I'm not able to speak clearly on it.
I love how you put this. That abandonment fears is the one, like you say, the stakes are high. You're really into this person. You really don't want to lose this person. And then you don't talk. And then when you do find somebody else that you can talk to, because the stakes are not that high, you're not scared of losing this person, you can actually start to form a bond with them where you start feeling heard and seen. And you are the one causing this because you didn't establish that relationship with your own partner.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a big one.
It is, and maybe that's the conversation that you need to have with your partner, to say, Louise, I need to speak to you about something that's really bothering me about our relationship, because if I don't, I feel that I don't want to make a mistake that ultimately ruins our relationship. Do you have time to speak with me about it? And you may say, I really want to, I feel that, Alan, and I want to speak to you about it, but right now I don't have time. Can we do that at 6 o'clock? But you commit as a couple, you commit to find time for that conversation, if it can happen right there. But that's the start, right? That's really the start about having openness. And let me tell you, like that, from an emotional intelligence perspective, your partner will probably be hijacked a bit, because that's the first time that you have made a comment like that. But behind that hijacking will also be like, wow, at some level they will say he or she had the courage to start this conversation. And maybe
go
ahead. Sorry.
I was on the receiving end of my husband not talking. He would very quietly light a cigarette and puff until he calmed down. And I didn't know what he was doing. I was like, are we good? I'm good. No problems. And he had inside himself. And I had a deep, deep yearning for him to contribute. I would ask him and he wouldn't. And then, as we grew, eventually he said to me, I didn't want to say anything that was wrong. I didn't know what to say. I didn't have a language for that. So I don't want to say anything that was wrong. And that fear of being wrong is not the thing that we should be focusing on. We must focus on the health of the relationship, which makes it worth even, and I love how you said that, even saying, I don't know if I'm going to get it right, but here it is, and ask for that space to do it, even if it's wrong, because if you suddenly start learning something that you're supposed to have been learning at 12, if your parents gave you the example, or if you were encouraged to have those kind of communication, or if you've seen your parents doing it, then you wouldn't need to practice as an adult. We're not going to get it right the first time. And if men don't have emotional language, they don't have emotional language. You've got to find out, what's the name of that feeling? What is this that I'm feeling? Because the habitual ones are fairly small range.
Yeah. And you bring up another great point there about men needing to be right. That is I think that is just in our DNA. And it goes back to this provider and protector mentality that we have. And I agree with that, with those terms as men, as we come to, as part of who we are in our makeup, that's part and parcel of us. But not so much that it hinders us from being open and vulnerable to our partner and in the right situation. And I think when we could step aside and say to ourselves, it's okay that I may not be right, and that with my partner we can work this through, then we become right, because now we've asked for more input. And we tend to be I know, at least for me, I won't broaden it too much, but I'll say from a workplace environment, I was better at that, not worrying about being right and getting collaboration and getting that to come in. But at home, because again, it was back to that, the stakes weren't as high. When I leave work, I don't leave work to go back with these people. I leave to come back to my spouse. So at home, the stakes are higher, but also the security should be there as well. And it is there. We just don't see it as men. We sometimes we're afraid because of past trauma and however that looks. And so we haven't processed it enough to be okay. And like I said, maybe it's not the big rock first, maybe it's a smaller one, whatever it takes, but you still need to open that conversation.
Yeah, because if there's anything that we have neglected to work on, our relationships are going to point it out to us. We can be successful in every other sphere of life, and we very often will be, because we are driven to prove ourselves. But our relationships they're going to tell us there's something you need to pay attention to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would totally agree with that. I think our relationships are a mirror for how we are in the world. And I'm not saying that is that we should base who we are about what's happening around us, but it's an indication of work that we may need to do. And that's the key. What of this, as you observe the relationship and you see things aren't working, the question we should be asking ourselves, both partners should be asking, is what part of this do I need to own?
Mm-hmm.
What part is not mine to own? Mm-hmm. And then work on that part that's yours to own. And ideally, you'd have that conversation then with your partner about, this is what I see and this is what I'll need to do for the relationship to work at. What are your thoughts? And because they may not be aware of some of the things that they need to work on that would help. And so you can guide that conversation with them. They may or may not agree, but the point is that it's out in the open now. And I would suggest as individuals that once something's pointed out to us, we'll start to see it show up now, not just in that relationship, but in other ones.
Yeah, because if somebody's not speaking up, they're not doing their 50% in the relationship. And if somebody is not willing to listen, they are not doing their 50% in the relationship. And without those two, speaking up and willing to listen, and willing to listen doesn't mean agree, it means willing to listen. Without those two, we don't have communication. And without communication, we cannot address any of our hard things in our relationships. We should have called this How to Talk About the 3 Most Difficult Things, because I think you've given some absolutely amazing examples here. Okay, so I want to check, before I ask you the last question, which is not going to be a difficult one. I want to check if anybody has any questions here for us. And no, there's not enough hearts there. Come on, people. I know how happy I am about the hearts. Give us a few hearts, because this is so amazing. I moan if I don't get hearts. I like a lot of hearts sitting there at the top. Okay. So here's my last question for you. So now somebody wakes up, right? You're talking to the awakened man, right?
Yeah.
Somebody suddenly figures out, I'm probably going to lose this unless I start paying attention, which is usually when people wake up, unfortunately. What are you telling? Do you have a few steps that you can... there's a heart. Thank you. Now I'm happy. Okay. What is it? Do you have a few steps that you can walk people through?
Sure. So once you've got to that point and you've recognized that your relationship's in trouble, because I think that's what you're asking, right? Yes. Relationship's in trouble and you need to do something. I think the first step you need to do is you need to acknowledge that with your partner. You need to acknowledge that the relationship isn't working, and acknowledge what you have to own for it. and what your plan is moving forward. Now that's very male oriented, because that's who I work with, is with men. But we have that conversation with our partners because they need to understand where you are in the relationship, and you may be surprised that they are thinking the same thing. And then from there, you let them know that you're willing to take responsibility for who you are, where you are, and what you want this relationship to aspire to become, and that you're going to do your work on it. And then you start that work, whatever that looks like for you. If it is about the big three topics, then great, then you do that work. If it's about dealing with past trauma from other relationships, the triggers that are there, then you're going to start working on that. But you need to acknowledge that first step with your partner, because to go out and do the work on your own, while that's admirable, nobody knows. And the most important person in your life at that time is your partner, and they need to know what's important for you. And that's what we've been talking about all day today. It's about what's important for you. What do I need to do to improve myself in this relationship, for the relationship to be all that it can be?
Yeah, because if somebody just start doing the work by themselves and without having those conversations, it seems and it feels like whatever happened in the past wasn't acknowledged.
Mm-hmm.
So there's nowhere to build on. And if you don't acknowledge it, then the partner and your partner is not part of your journey. Then, and sometimes we don't want to. Sometimes we've got shame about whatever happened in the past, and we want to just forget it as fast as possible. And here's the solution. I'm fixing it. What's your problem? The problem is the hurts and the feelings of abandonment or rejection. For example, say somebody overworked for too long and didn't spend time with the family.
Yeah.
There's going to be feelings there that are unresolved, and they have to be addressed. And then we have to do the stretching, and we have to say, I'm stretching. I am stretching because in the past I didn't do this. And we can in turn ask our partners to stretch for us. But if we just ignore it, then it's as if it didn't exist. And nobody gets that closure.
Yeah. Yes, because I truly believe that it is our work to do in order to improve the world and the society and everything that is around us. It's my work to do that for me. It's not for me to say to somebody else that they need to change, they need to do something else. As Gandhi said, you need to be the change for the change in the world. And so we need to own that piece and take responsibility for the things that we're not happy with in our life, and to explain that as best that we can to our partner. And then you go out and get the work, and whether that's whatever type of work you want to do. If that's counseling work, great. If that's spiritual work, that's great. If it's doing men's work, but to do something to start taking responsibility for how you are showing up, and that alone will send a strong signal to your partner that you care enough about the relationship to do some work for yourself. And again, it's about modeling what you want to see out of the relationship. They may or may not do the same thing. That's not important. The important piece is at the end of the journey for you, or as you're going along your journey, because I don't think we ever get to the end, is that the relationship will either flourish and become deeper than it's ever been, or you will come to a point where both of you will recognize that this is time for the relationship to end, and that's okay as well, because you have done that work now. You haven't just ended it, as probably has occurred in the past, without a real understanding about why did it end, what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely true. Totally agree with you. So, yeah, and this is, again, absolutely astounding, amazing content and very, very helpful. I am going to ask everybody who watches this afterward to give us comments. We'll go back in and we'll answer you if you have any questions. And I'm going to post your links in the chat for everybody, because if you're a man, you want to be supported, then and you're ready to wake up, you are already awake and you don't know where to go, you need a bit more waking up, then Alan's your guy. And so watch out in the comments. I'll go and put your links. And I also, if you're on Instagram, I love your short little clips that you do. I see them regularly, and I love them. They're short and they're to the point. So that's also a great thing to follow. Right. No questions there, right? I think you've covered it all, hey, and it was great examples. Okay, thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate it. We'll do another one, I'm sure.
We sure will. I appreciate the invite. Thank you so much.
We'll do another one when the book for men, by men, about relationships and stuff like that. When it comes out, we'll keep on talking.
Excellent.
Because it is so important to keep these conversations going in the world, and it's so much needed. Emotional healthiness and transparency, becoming solution driven is so important. So thank you so much for showing up and sharing. It was great. Like love talking to you, and thank you for everyone who's watching and for everyone who's coming afterwards. We appreciate you too. Keep the hearts going, people. You know I like the hearts.
Right on.
Okay. All right. So I'm just going to play my little song, and then we'll switch off as soon as that's done. Okay. Thanks a lot to you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.